All right, and we are live. Welcome everybody to our Comms Helpline, Engaging a Remote Workforce session. Of course, as a lot of you know, we've recently experienced a huge surge in the popularity of remote working for one reason or another. So we thought we'd kind of get together, gather up some questions and have a discussion on on some best practices in communicating and engaging a remote workforce. One thing that we like to do with all of our live sessions is understand kind of where people are calling in from. So you have a questions tab on the right-hand side. If you could just type in where you're calling in from, it's always really interesting to see where people are located. I'm calling in from today, sunny Helsinki, Finland, and I think I'll let our beautiful speakers tell you where they're calling in from in just a second. And speaking of those speakers, we're joined today by three amazing professionals, Jenny, Janet, and Shell. Thank you guys for coming on. If we could start off the session with just a bit of an introduction from each of you guys. Jenny, how about you go first?
Thanks. Hi, everyone. I'm Jenny Field. I run my own consultancy, which is called Redefining Communications. I've worked in comms for around 16 years and worked as a global comms director, a head of comms and all sorts of stuff, but specializing in the internal comms space and quite passionate about that deskless remote workforce, as well as I've usually worked in hospitality and done some research on how to communicate with these challenging workers. So that's me. I also volunteer for the Chartered Institute of Public Relations, and I'm their president this year, as well as a board director for them. So big fan of professional development as well. So lovely to see people joining today to do some learning, which is lovely.
Awesome, and thank you so much for joining. Really great to have you. Janet, how about you?
Hi, yeah, Janet Hitchin. I have recently set up a consultancy. Great time to set it up. Pandemic starts, set up a consultancy. Great thing to do. But why not? So I have previously, I'm like Jenny, really weird, 16 years in internal comms. So I was like, do, something spooky going on there. And I've worked in finance, I've worked in tech and retail. And more recently, I spent 9 years at a really big fruit company that most people have probably heard of. Really passionate about internal communications, really passionate about engaging employees and putting them at the center of what it is that we do within business. I think if you galvanize your workforce and you actually get everybody together and going in the same direction, which is whatever direction the company wants to go in, you can really move mountains and make big change. So really excited to be talking today and slightly overwhelmed and daunted by where everybody's signing in from. It's actually quite scary as we can see them all coming through. It's like, wow, okay, cool.
Yeah, it's always a lot of fun to see where people are calling in from. Thank you so much, Janet, also for being on the call. Really looking forward to having your input during the session. And last but not least, Shell, good morning. How about you give people a few sentences on who you are and where you're from?
Sure. Good morning. I'm Shell Holtz. I am the Director of Internal Communications at Webcor, which is a commercial builder we're headquartered in San Francisco. I am in my home office in Concord, California, which is in the San Francisco East Bay. Before this, I joined Webcor in 2017 after 21 years with my own consultancy. I have been doing employee communications for 43 years. I've also done media relations and investor relations and community relations and the whole spectrum of corporate communications. But I started with internal communications after I left the newspaper business, and I've always done it. It's always been in my portfolio, and it's the communication discipline I'm most passionate about. I'm a fellow of the International Association of Business Communicators, certified strategic management communication professional, and my co-host, Neville Hobson, who is based in the UK, and I have presented a communication-themed podcast called For Immediate Release since January 2005, when there were about 400 podcasts out there, and it continues to this day.
Well, thank you so much for joining, being on here. We were just joking before we were going live that Shell, our professional podcaster here, is with his professional mic and the setup, putting us all to shame with this smooth audio
We're
quality.
not worthy.
And like I say, I have it. It's not like I'm not going to use it, right?
Yeah. Just like throw in your ear pods for webinar. Okay. Well, thank you all for joining. If our viewers aren't aware, my name is Alex. I'm the product marketing manager at Smart, and I'll be the moderator/host today. Smart, of course, is a employee communications platform that specializes, among other things, connecting employers with their remote workforces. So really happy to host this kind of session with professionals such as you guys. All right, before we get into the questions, a few just to really quick housekeeping things. This session is 100% Q&A focused. So you've already been testing out the questions tab. People have been typing in there. That will also be used for your questions. Really great to see people from, just off the top of the list here, we have Montreal, Bangalore, Brazil, Nairobi, Dublin, Berkshire, London, Houston. We have, I need to stop going through them all, but amazing to see you all here. Use that question tab during the session as well for your questions, and we'll pick them up as we go along. Also, we will be posting on social media with our Comms Helpline hashtag, but just a shout out, if anybody wants to ask questions on social media, our social media manager is managing and monitoring that both LinkedIn and Twitter as well, so we can pick them up from there. All right, but with that, I think we can go ahead and get into the questions. Now, we had a few questions that were submitted beforehand, and we've gone through them and we picked out a few that would be really interesting to answer to start the session off. And I think we can go ahead and start off with this question that came in from John Javi. And for this question, I'm going to read a bit of the context because it actually gives a lot of kind of backstory to this question. And I think our marketing manager, Olis, will put it in the chat soon as well. So the question is COVID-19 related, as now we have a remote workforce in various situations. Some stuck abroad when borders closed, others don't have their devices and cannot access company information. Still others who work in remote airside stands or crew who are flying in these uncertain times. There's no one-size-fits-all solution, so we've been trying various channels and tools. So the question reads, what is the most underrated channel/tool when it comes to engaging with a remote, diverse workforce? And this question, of course, is really interesting because in Jan Javi's situation, it's clearly in the context of an airline. And yeah, I'd like to just open it up for discussion on what is the most underrated channel to engage with a remote and diverse workforce. What do you guys think?
For me, it's definitely line managers. And I know that sometimes people will say they're not a channel, sometimes people say they are. But in terms of communication, engagement, people having the right information to do their jobs well, line managers come up again and again as being such a key part of that. And I know that's challenging in airlines. I know it's challenging in hospitality with shift work and people don't see their managers all the time. But they are the most underused channel that we have. They are the most underdeveloped people in terms of communication skills. So for me, that's the place to invest both your time in terms of helping them be better communicators, but also your budget in terms of developing those skills as well. So that would be mine.
I would add on to that. It's about giving those because I completely agree. Line managers, having worked in retail where we had 60,000 people remote, and so 150 of us sat in EMEA head office, we're not going to be looking at that many people. But having those line managers, having somebody who is there, who is available, who is right next to that person and not remote, they are with them. It's absolutely huge. But what is important is that you give those line managers the tools that they need and the information they need in order to be able to do their job. So that could be, and I've seen this before, giving them permission to do the things that they need to do. Because some people don't realize that, oh, actually that can also be part of my job. So it's about figuring out what some of the blockers are. And something I used really practically, and that we use really practically in retail, was we organized clinic calls where it wasn't about a download of here's all the stuff you need to do. It was more about listening to what they had to say and figuring out, okay, what do we now need to do in order to get you the information in order for you to do a better job, because you are the conduit that is actually the most important one here. And that was an incredibly powerful thing that we were able to do.
I will cast a third vote for frontline managers, but I'll add a caveat, and that is that they are the most inconsistent and unreliable form of communication too, over which you have the least control. Yeah. Most people who have been hired or promoted into a line manager function weren't given that job based on their communication skills, not even necessarily on their people skills. It's generally on their technical knowledge. In some cases, it's even a matter of promoting them because they've hit the ceiling on the pay scale for jobs where you don't manage somebody. So while this is definitely an underrated resource, it's also one that needs to be cultivated. And if it hasn't been cultivated at the time the pandemic hits, it's going to be a real struggle to activate them in any kind of consistent way. I'm not suggesting that you don't do it. I'm suggesting that you don't do it in a vacuum, that there be other channels of communication, including underrated ones that you can use to reach employees. One that if you have cultivated it, that works really well alongside managers is each other. If you can identify influencers in the organization and develop communication networks of influencers, a lot of times that can fill in gaps that a manager who is less inclined to communicate well might leave open. So there was a study a few years ago found 69% of frontline managers are not comfortable communicating with their employees. So they are absolutely the primary focus of my communication strategy right now. It's the biggest opportunity that we have, but it takes a lot of work.
Right. And this is a great point because, so much we talk in internal communications, we talk so much about the importance of kind of cascading information down through middle managers or line managers or frontline managers or whatever that channel or source may be. But they do sometimes need that kind of nudge or that training.
And as long as you raise that, I'm not a fan of the cascade concept. It always reminds me of the children's game of telephone. Is that something that they play outside the U.S.? Where one person whispers into the ear of the next, it goes down the line, and by the time it gets to the end, it's a completely different message. A managed cascade, though, where it's not a question of passing the information along, it's a question of translating and interpreting it. This is what the senior executive said. Here's what it means to our business unit. And then here's what it means to our department. And then here's what it means to our team. And that means that you have to equip these managers with the ability to answer those questions and the platform in which they should be able to do that in the varying circumstances of their teams.
That's one of the reasons I think that this idea of these clinic calls, where instead of it just being a download to managers to say, here are the key messages, you must repeat the key messages. Nobody is an automaton, nobody's a robot. So if you have some form of call or some form where people can actually, the managers who are going to be delivering that can say, okay, I need to translate this. How can I figure out what that means to me? What are my questions? If I'm a manager of managers, what are their questions that we can figure all of that out so we can actually translate that correctly. And that's where I think it's not just a one-way street where in a pandemic or in a crisis, it can get, right, what's the speediest way we can do it? Go, go, go. You've got to listen back to figure out what is it they need? What are they not understanding? What additional information have you maybe missed, or things are changing so quickly you don't realize is actually needed, that you can take off their plate and allow them to be able to do what they need to do. I think one of the other things as well is also when we talk about giving them permission, it's also about giving them permission to say, I don't know, but I'll find out. because there's nothing worse being a manager and thinking, I don't know, how on earth do I cover it? You're not going to cover it on a Zoom call. Everyone can see everything on a Zoom call. But actually having that ability to say, I don't know, but you know what, I'm going to find out because there's a call that happens this evening and I will ask that question and we'll get their information back to you. As long as people know where their information is or that it's been raised, it's okay. It's if things suddenly go quiet or they don't know where that's gone, that's when it becomes complicated and that's when it becomes difficult. So it's having that transparency and, you know, Brené Brown says it best, doesn't she? Power of vulnerability, saying, I don't know, but I will find out for you.
Yep. Yeah, that's and I like that that notion that you guys brought up is the kind of idea of the broken telephone. I think, Shell, it's called broken telephone, at least here in Finland. So kind of thinking about when we utilize line managers and frontline managers for communications, how to avoid that concept.
And by the way, when we speak about underrated channels, and one of the scenarios that was presented was people who've been caught in countries that they couldn't get back when the lockdown started. I mean, this is old school technology, but if you can record a voicemail message every day that provides an update and people know what number to call, I mean, for goodness sake, at least they have a means of finding out what's happening right now. I mean, there's some old school technologies that still work.
That's a good point. We sometimes forget about the old school in light of technological advancement. But that's a good little nice addition. All right, I think we can kind of go ahead and keep going with the questions. I'm gonna now turn this slide off and make us full screen. But again, everybody keep putting your questions in the questions tab. We really love to see those. Next, I think what we could pick out from here is a question from Sonia, which is, I'm specifically looking to understand how we can better engage employees who have recently been onboarded in their new workplace. Now, onboarding a remote workforce is always, a little tricky. People that are going to be working remotely regardless, but now especially with all the lockdowns and the change in how we can interact with the office, etc. Have you guys, through your, discussions with others or consulting or whatever, come across any good tactics to engage employees that are being onboarded when this kind of remote work is the norm?
I think, Shell might have done some of this because he's working in-house, so he might have some really nice examples. The one thing for me is to remember what you do in person. So if you've got a really good induction plan, then don't throw it away just because you now can't do that physically. How do you take that and do that virtually? And how do you do stuff that allows people to feel connected to your values and your behaviors and your purpose? Because you can't hide from that now more than ever. So if you used to buddy someone up, which is what we used to do and have recommended, then you can still buddy somebody up, even though they're not physically going to see that person. They can still be buddied with somebody, even though it's not physical. If you normally do a big induction event where you bring people together, you can still do that. You can just do it over a Zoom or another platform. You can send them boxes to their homes that's got stuff in it that welcomes them, and that can be all sorts of different things that are relevant and appropriate to your brand. But there's lots of things to do, and think creatively about how you can do things. But if you've got a good set of values and behaviors, then getting that engagement is going to be easier. But it's really focusing on how do you want people to feel? How do you want them? What do you want them to do and how do you want them to think? So those kind of really basic stuff that we often come back to, that feeling part is certainly what we're talking more about now when it comes to that employee experience. Is we want people to feel cared for, we want them to feel confident, we want them to feel safe, we want them to feel reassured, all of those things. So it's really coming back to those core things, and then how do you translate that into a virtual space?
If you have an onboarding process, as opposed to just a one-day new hire orientation, adhere to it. Just use the tools that are available. But I find the problem with a lot of organizational onboarding is that it is pretty much confined to a new hire orientation. Those are even worse now than usual because they are being done over Zoom or some sort of video teleconference. And if you think it was hard to retain all the information they threw at you in one day when it was face-to-face, imagine when you're trying to do it this way. for a full day or a half day. New hire orientation should be a year-long process, at a minimum 90 days, where you're in regular touch with people, because I'll tell you, we have a video that we do for managers. It's 2 minutes. It's a short lesson. It's usually funny. And the one on onboarding showed somebody being led to his cube on a project site after the new hire orientation and being dumped there. And he kind of pokes his head up from above and puts his hands on the top of the cube and goes, "Hello." And imagine how you're going to feel like that when you're in your home as opposed to in the office. Where at least you can go into a common area and ask somebody a question. Don't leave them alone, right? Don't leave them hanging there trying to figure things out for themselves. Have regular check-ins. Again, I think this is an important role for the hiring manager, but also for the department head. There should be regular check-ins. There should be regular training, how to do different things in the organization. Make them feel like you care about helping them get up to speed in a hurry. The flip side of that, making the rest of the organization aware of them, what we do is every new hire gets a questionnaire with a lot of questions that have nothing to do with work. What's your favorite food? What's your hobby? And we do new hire postings on the intranet. They also go up on the digital signage that introduces these folks. And a lot of our people have been remote right along. If you're working out on a project site on the peninsula and you're in the trailer and that's your office, you're never at corporate headquarters. You're never out there with all the other employees. So we have to use these kinds of methods to get people to know who they are and to get them to feel like they are part of the organization.
I think just adding on to that, there's a couple of things. So that the mentor and the buddy thing, so that you can ask the daft questions. What's the thing that you're just like, I can't ask my manager, that was just embarrassing. Well, is there, have a Slack channel, have a Teams chat, whatever platform you use that and have a channel that allows people to go, I've just got this really stupid question, like, how do I do this thing? How do I find this thing? How do I log off from that? How do I log on to that? And almost sort of you create a community of new people who've all joined together. So they're all learning together, because someone's manager might be better than someone else's, or they might be at slightly different stages and all learning different things, and you can learn from each other. And if you realize that you're not on your own and you're kind of all in this together, it feels a little less challenging, because I'm not on my own. It's not me being stupid. It's actually, I can ask this and there's no judgment. And I think getting the basics right. So Jenny said it, you've got to make sure that people, how do they feel? If they've been left off a calendar, if they've been left off the weekly team meeting, if you've not added them to an email that needs to go right, that's not cool. And you're going to be feeling sort of, were they waiting for me? Am I supposed to be here? You want to make sure that all of those basics are done. They need to be added to everything. They need to be welcomed with open arms. And one of the things that I used to do was create a month plan and say, here's people that you're going to be meeting for work, but here's people you're going to be meeting for coffee, because you just need to know people. Because the more relationship you have around the business, the more you're going to understand how the business works and how things go, different areas of the business. It's going to make you feel more comfortable. You can still do that. And I think both Shell and Jenny have said it, you don't just throw it all out. You say, how do we just move that online? How do I make sure that if, someone has a coffee, they just have a coffee? Doesn't need to be an hour, 15 minutes, fine. How are you? Tell me about you. Tell me the weirdest thing that happened to you this week. Okay, what are some of the things you want me to, what's your job? And last from me, I think a friend of mine's literally just started a new role at a big American organization. And she said the biggest thing for her and the most important thing was having her line manager's availability. So she would sort of save up all of her questions for the end of the day, and then she'd just say, look, here's a load of things that I need to know. And he would immediately get back to her. And she said it was his responsiveness that actually made her feel confident, because she went, okay, he's got my back. She's taken on a huge team. She knows that they're all asking her questions. She's not feeling like piggy in the middle, not really understanding. He's got her back, and she knows that she can count on him. And I think that's incredibly important, to know that, somebody is there with you and supporting you.
I think this comes back to what we talked about with line managers, and where we are focused very heavily is on making sure that line managers understand that employees want to be mentored, they want to be coached, they want somebody to care about their future and their development in the organization, and they want to be cared about as a human being, as an individual. And it's the line manager who presents that most frequently, has the greatest number of opportunities to have that kind of engagement with an employee. And it's particularly important during those first 3 or 6 months.
Right. One thing that we also, I just want to highlight here is something that we advise all of our clients to do that use Smart for onboarding is to, even before an employee actually has their day one, to grant them access to the platform and start feeding them information, whether or not that's super relevant to them, or that, well, of course, all the information should be relevant to their onboarding, but make sure that they start getting informed even before day one, because
even have a Facebook group for our interns before they start their internship, so they can get to know each other, even though they don't have access to the company network at that point.
Exactly.
But it's lovely because you create that cohort and you create that community of interns immediately, and that community goes forward, and they can ask the daft questions, and they can figure out stuff, and everybody kind of comes with slightly different information, which means that actually if you've got 4 pieces of information and not just one, you're already way ahead. So
I think you were spot on, Janet, as well, about just getting the basics right. There's something for me about, we often forget the basics when we're running around doing so much, and you take for granted that people can see someone in a corridor or they can wander over there. Those basics are fundamental right now, and I think getting them right is going to be really important for people to feel listened to and feel cared about. And I think the responsiveness point is equally valid. You've kind of got to contract what that relationship's going to be as that line manager, and also what's okay and how responsive you can be. And I think it's okay to be upfront and have those conversations. If you've hired someone, then, say up front, how are we going to work this? How do you want to catch up every Friday morning over a coffee at 10? How is this going to work for you? What's going on in your life? What's going on in my life? And how do we do that? And they are conversations that should happen anyway, but I think often don't in the workplace, because we're so used to things just kind of carrying on as normal, and people just sort of slotting in. So that's a really nice point.
Yeah.
I think you hit the nail on the head. It's asking them what works for them.
Yeah.
Because I know, previous teams, I've had someone who'd be like, once a week, fine.
Yeah.
I'm good. And there's somebody else who'd be like, actually, I want to talk to you every day. I'm like, great, okay. Fine. But understanding how those people are going to, what is going to support that person to be the most productive and happiest employee that they can be, it's going to be different for everybody. So you ask the question. It's not, here's what I need from you. It's, what do you need from me as a manager to get you on board, to make sure that you're 100% okay? And that's the line manager thing. It's not necessarily a communication thing, but maybe that's where communicators can nudge and help and support. And
Exactly. Well, guys, I know we could talk about this for days, but we have a ton more questions to go. So I think we can go ahead and move right on. There's an interesting question here from Elise, which kind of links back to something we were talking about earlier. With people working remotely, there's more emergence of inconsistent communication and subculture pockets amidst different departments, for better or for worse. Employees are only communicating directly with their immediate team, and bubbles are developing. How can we cultivate more consistency? Shell, is this an issue of broken telephone, or is this something else?
Well, it's not an issue that we've been experiencing, and I think that's because we have these bubbles anyway. Every construction project is like its own little company, and the walls are not necessarily very porous around those organizations. And one of my goals has been to sort of ventilate those silos. But I think, first of all, if you're looking for consistency, you need to give people something to be consistent with. So you need to be over communicating right now, or you can't over communicate right now. For example, we have a weekly email update, which is, as most of them are, a summary of what's been published on the internet in the last week. But since the pandemic started, we've had a daily coronavirus email update. There have been 3 or 4 of these that have just simply said there's nothing to report today, but everybody knows that there's going to be information coming out today. The executive team has been doing a weekly all-company update that is mostly Q&A. We published all those Q&As to a coronavirus site that we have created on the internet, which is the authoritative single source of truth for all things related to what we're doing around this. And also based on the fact that the Edelman Trust Barometer says that people see their company as the most credible resource for information about the coronavirus. We're also sharing government information and the information from the health agencies, both local and federal and international. So we have a flood of information going on out there. We've also established Microsoft Teams where people can engage from outside of their department. We have one called WebCore Connect, where people can do everything from sharing pictures of the pets they're with at home to what their makeshift workstation looks like. I loved the picture of somebody who had their laptop on an ironing board so that they could turn it into a sitting and standing desk.
Yeah, I've heard that.
Recipes, workout videos that people have created. We're really trying to create a sense of community and cohesiveness to maintain the culture so it does not devolve into these niches or cliques that can happen. And we haven't seen that as a result. I think that keeping people engaged on a regular basis and giving them things to do with each other and places to go and keeping things lively and interesting has helped avoid that.
I think it sounds like there's so much going on. Like, why would you need to go and have little side conversations when there's so much going on centrally? I know from talking to some of my clients, they have experienced these little kind of silos, and they were there to begin with. So where you've got multiple locations, they did have people that felt very siloed in those locations and almost that sort of tribal mentality. So I think that for me, there has to be a question of, is it good? Is it bad? Like, what's the damage of that happening? So I think we have to see whether it is a problem, whether we just feel it's a problem. As communicators, we often see that and think, oh my God, it is an issue. They're not listening to this or they're not getting that. And actually, I think it's worth just exploring that a bit, see whether it's our own worry for control or whether it is a genuine issue. I think at the moment, people are also going to gravitate to people that they know, in feelings of, ambiguity, the fear, all of those things. There's lots of stuff that will happen that's innate in our human behavior. So that will naturally happen. We'll gravitate towards that for safety. But I think it's also looking at that one message and that one hook that's going to bring people together. So if people are starting to create little silos and little sort of subcultures or little things are happening, find your influencers in there. I think it was Shell talked about influencers earlier. They are going to be key people for you to just tune into and just listen to that conversation. It's not about you going in and stamping that out. It's about going in and listening and finding out why they've created it and what's going on. And then also creating stuff with purpose that allows people to come together as one. So with our client, we're looking at the fact that if we just did a coffee morning, people wouldn't necessarily come. And certainly we'd need to have something that would link to the whole organization. So it's finding that core purpose of the organization, what you can bring people together on, and then give them something to do that maybe breaks up those subcultures and might create other ones in different ways. But if you can knit different ones together, eventually you've just got loads of people collaborating and talking in your organization, and that subculture feeling kind of goes away. So there's some little things you can do to unpick and support. But I think really it's about listening, and it's about making sure it's not our own fear and worry that's driving the concern behind that happening, because it might be totally okay.
I am 100% behind that. Surprise! As soon as you asked the question, I was like, is it a problem?
Yeah.
What is the problem? And unless I've asked more questions, I don't know that I can answer more than sort of Jenny and Shell already have. I think I've got a ton of questions that I would love to ask that would allow me to sort of understand more about how to then navigate this. But I think sometimes it is a question of figuring out what exactly is the problem. Because it might just be that these things are set up and they're not hearing from information in the way you'd like them to hear the information, which is sort of the channel and the way, the thing that you've defined in whatever. But it doesn't matter as long as the information is correct. If the information is incorrect, much bigger challenge. And I think it's figuring out, why is that information incorrect? Where's that coming from? And that needs to get nipped in the bud immediately, because misinformation is a major problem.
Yeah.
But it might be that this is a new way of discovering some channel or some flow that you just hadn't realized existed. And it's like, actually, organically, this has come up and this has happened. And you're like, ooh, and I could harness this. How could I harness this? What could I do? I just let it go, and do I embrace it? And who do I talk to that sort of that I can work with to make sure that this actually sort of supports what it is that I'm doing? Because the best behaviors that you can have are the behaviors that happen naturally. So if this is something that's happening naturally in your company, how can you, that means people automatically do it. They're not having to learn something to do new in order to be able to achieve that. So I would figure out how you can harness that, because it's something that, that they're doing naturally. It's not hard. But yeah, before I would go there, I would also ask a ton of questions as to why is this a problem? Why is this a problem? And I would keep asking why, and I would ask lots of different people at all levels of the organization. Tell me about how you find out this. How does that work for you? Do you like it? Does it work? Sometimes just a simple mapping of an employee journey of where are they finding out information and how does that make them feel can allow you to think, oh, okay, it's all good. It's actually fine. It's not an issue. But yeah, maybe you've just uncovered a whole new channel that you can engage with, enjoy, cultivate, nurture, and all of those wonderful words.
Yeah, exactly. So it's not as, not necessarily a problem. It's more on how you view it and how you utilize that channel for your benefit. I really like that. I wanted to pick up a question here because, of course, this is something that's on people's mind a lot. And this is from Pratna. I hope I said that right. I probably didn't. If I didn't, I apologize. What info should we be relaying to furloughed employees to keep them up to date, but not to overstep the rules? Any tips on how to re-onboard employees who have been on furlough for 12 plus weeks?
Well, in terms of the information you provide them, as much as you possibly can. Our furloughed employees, who are pretty much all back, the construction rules have been loosened and our projects are up and running again. They were never shut down in Los Angeles, which considered construction essential. But in Northern California, we did furlough all of our hourly union laborers, carpenters, drywallers and the like. And we created an external website for them. And we had, first of all, detailed information about how they can apply for unemployment, which they're eligible for because they're furloughed. We had a list of all projects and their current status so that you could check and see if your project was spinning back up, and information to get in touch with your superintendent to find out if you were coming back. I think the whole idea of furloughing rather than laying off is that whether it's 1 week or 12 weeks, they know their jobs. They know the company, they know the project that they were on. They come right back into the swing of things. In fact, for the people who have actually been laid off on the salaried side, the message is pretty clear. If we get busy enough again that we need to hire, we're going back to the people we laid off first, because there's not a lot of onboarding that's needed for somebody who's already worked here. So I don't think that's a terribly big deal. I think, when you're furloughed, you know your job and you're ready to come back and get started.
I think it's such a tricky balance, isn't it, in terms of the legalities around what you can say. I know that the CIPR internal comms group, CIPR Inside, did some guidance on this mainly for the UK, but that's accessible to everybody. So if you're looking and need some advice, then please do check that out. But I think the biggest thing that kept coming up was that it can't be about work. So I think as long as you're communicating with them around things to do with their wellness, around their mental health, around community, all of those things, absolutely fine. But I also think that Shell's idea is perfect in terms of this is kind of the project, and then being able to see where that project is. If your business works like that, then finding a way of helping people understand that phasing or kind of how you're doing stuff, I think is totally fine. I had heard some people saying they were inviting people to meetings. That's not okay. So there is quite a clear line, but making sure they're informed so they can make decisions is really important. And then that kind of reboarding employees, I think really industry specific. So I know a lot of people that are furloughed and are loving life. You know, I know people that are having time to do a lot of things that they've never done. You know, they're you know, working out, they're going on hikes, they're learning stuff. You know, they're really embracing this time not working, but being, you know, relatively financially stable. So I think if you're re-onboarding, there's something for me about checking in on that balance, checking in on, you know, what's changed for you, because the world is different and the world of work is different. And I think if we don't have that conversation, you're going to miss an opportunity to understand what people need as they return to work, because their priorities, their values, things will shift. We don't know what individuals have been through during this pandemic. And I think that's also something to be mindful of. So I just encourage you to have those conversations and have them one-to-one as much as you can, as much as possible, with the numbers that you're kind of dealing with.
Yeah, my comment was going to be, don't treat them as employees, but as a human. So
Janet and I get along very well. We've never met in person, but we've saying we need to.
We're so going for a glass of wine when this is all over. It's going to be epic. The world is going to be put to rights.
Absolutely.
But I think it's about that human experience, and it's about what has everybody been through, because some people are absolutely loving life. There are people I know who are like, nice weather in the UK, sunbathing. Some people are going to come back and they're going to be bronzed, you know, they're going to look great. Some people are going to come back and they're going to run ragged because they've been homeschooling 3 children and trying to figure out how to deal with maybe a partner who's had COVID, or some people have got partners who are key workers and they've gone through all of that. Some people have had partners who have doctors who've said, right, I have to go and live in a hospital. I have to go and live in a hotel for 12 weeks. Goodbye. So you don't know what people have been through. So you just have to bring them back as a human. It's the human. This is where it's not the employee experience. It's the human experience. And so if you are checking in with them, again, it's back to those line managers. Have line managers been talking to them about how are you? It's not about, did you tick all of these things off your list of things to do today? It's how are you? And actually meaning how are you? And wanting to hear the answer to how are you, and knowing that it's okay, that the answer isn't, yeah, fine, let's crack on. Right. And that's okay. It's got to be about that human experience, because we've all done this very differently. And some people will not want to go back. Some people will be annoyed that they can't do Zoom yoga at 9:45 in the morning, and then, you know, and that things have suddenly they've gotten into a rhythm, and suddenly that rhythm is smack, it's gone. That's going to be difficult, and there's going to be that period of adjustment. But it's about being open, being honest, being transparent, being able to have those conversations, saying, you know what, this is hard. And as Shell said, everybody knows how to do their job. If they did before, they still do now. They've not sort of magically forgotten. But it might be that it's just a bit hard, and it's context that's doing that. So the human experience is what we need to look after.
If I can add, there was research that was done within the last couple of weeks by PepsiCo, the marketing group, that found what consumers are looking for most from marketers right now is empathy. And I think that translates directly to internal communications as well. If the organization is not behaving empathetically toward its employees, then you're going to have some engagement fallout from that. You need to be showing empathy for what your employees are going through, whether they've been furloughed or, you know, I know employees who can't wait to get back to the office. They don't have a home office. They've got their kids at home. Their spouse is also working from home. They're going nuts. They can't wait to get back. I mean, there's empathy to be shown to them as well. Because they can't.
It's understanding your people, isn't it? You know, the extroverts are sort of literally climbing the walls, going, get me out of here, I need humans. The introverts are sort of going, quite like this is all good for me, I can, you know. So it's about each individual's experience, and it's making sure that when they come back, and hopefully if they come back, what that looks like, because they might be coming back to a different team. There might be, as Shell said, people might have been laid off, so it's not the full team that they're coming back to. And that's going to be really tough.
And what are they coming back
we're going to be coming back to?
What does, you know, they're not coming back to something that is the same as it was before. And I think that's the bit that, you know, is so important. I love your piece about the kind of, you know, the human experience, because for me it is all about the fact that people are individuals. You can't you can't take a cookie cutter approach to this. It's not a one size fits all. That was in the first question, and it shouldn't be.
Right.
People are individuals, so we have to treat them as individuals, and that takes time.
One of the things we're doing this week is a survey of employees to ask them whether they're ready to come back to work, what their worries and concerns are. We're letting them know that this is not an anonymous survey, because if somebody says, look, I still have an issue and I'm not ready to be in that first wave to return to work after June 1st, we want to know who they are so that we can accommodate them and figure out how we're going to do who's working at home and who's coming back in that first essential wave. So it's all about the individual and their needs and their perceptions. Definitely not a one size fits all.
Right, exactly. It's like there's a great quote which goes, we're all in the same storm, but we're all in different boats. So I think that applies very well to what we're all going through. I think kind of bordering on this, on the topic of, empathy and communication, I wanted to bring up this question by Olga, which is, what is the best way to break the news about layoffs or pay reductions? Now, this necessarily doesn't even, it's not necessarily in the context of a remote workforce, but in general. There were some great examples. For example, the CEO of Airbnb had a really good one.
Yeah, just read that. Just read that.
Yeah, exactly.
That is
just
gold
read
standard.
That. There you go.
Gold standard. Done.
And there's another great one by the CEO of Marriott, which I also really liked. Are there any other good examples that you guys can point to that have been going on now?
I think most people are talking Airbnb. I did say last week, I haven't heard from any employees at Airbnb, and I think it's easy for us as comms people to see something like that and think it's amazing. But I haven't heard any employees say how they felt receiving it. So I think I think it's great, but I reserve judgment till I hear some of that. But I also think it's got to be specific for you and your organization, So think about how you would communicate redundancies normally, because normally you'd go through a certain process, you'd be having one-to-one conversations, you'd be sending letters, all of that remains the same. You've just got to think about how you're going to do it a little bit more than just, having conversations in meeting rooms. So the process a lot of times is legal. There's a way that you would have done it before. That way doesn't need to dramatically change. So it's trying to keep that calm sense all the way through, that, you've probably done this before. You know what to do. You know how to do it. You've just got to, lead with empathy and revisit some of those ways of doing things.
And I think if you haven't done it before, the Airbnb thing it literally is the gold standard. But the reason it's the gold standard is because it came across authentically. It didn't feel like somebody else had written it for him. Yeah. And I have seen a couple of sort of comments from people at Airbnb who said, I'm now available, but I'm so proud to have worked at Airbnb. I'm so proud of what's happened. And you think the pride that they have in the organization is really touching. And it's that authenticity. There's some real basics, don't find things out on Twitter. I think there was one organization which had put some stuff out and it all went out on Twitter, and their employees all took to Twitter to make sure that they knew that was not okay. Yeah. And well done them, because that's where, that sort of social piece comes in, and you can't do that. You can't tell externally, put a message out externally and not actually tell your workforce what's going on. That is not okay.
But you said it again, Janet. It's the basics. It's getting the basics right. And I think as comms, as comms people, sometimes we aren't great at getting those basics right, and we can't afford to not now, because for exactly that reason you said, that you can't read something on Twitter. You couldn't before this. That was never okay. Yeah. It's just really not okay now. Yeah. So we will be less. People will be less forgiving of that now, I think is the point. But I just keep coming back to your point about the basics. I think for me, it's just so important about what we do.
I think sometimes people. Sorry, Chell.
No, go ahead.
I was just going to say, just coming back on that, I think we all expect that we have to do something big and amazing and fabulous, and it's like, no, you don't. Yeah. You have to do the basics right, and if you do the basics right, then you can learn, you can go up from that. But if you get those basics wrong, you've lost everybody. Yeah. You've lost your audience. So don't sit there racking your brains thinking, I've got to come up with the new, most innovative, most creative, most funky, most sexy, most whatever way of doing this thing. You don't. What you have to do is come up is make sure that those people are treated like human beings, people are respected, people feel that they are valued, and that what you do is authentic. That's the most important thing.
I also think it's important that you have been communicating well about the state of the company leading up to this. What happened in our organization was as projects were shut down, because in the Bay Area counties, they said construction's not essential unless it's low-income housing. So almost all of our projects shut down. So we didn't have the revenue coming in anymore. And the executives got up at the very first one of those weekly all-employee updates that they do, and they said, our goal is to avoid layoffs, and we are going to be taking steps, and we're going to be sharing those with you to do our level-headed best to avoid having to terminate anybody from the organization. So the first thing they did was that the executive team, which is just, I think it's 14 people at the top of the organization, took a 15% pay cut. They were the first ones to experience any pain. When that wasn't enough, the next level down, included me as a director, got 10% pay cuts. Ultimately, there were 5% pay cuts for the rest of the organization, except for those who had workload reductions. This was explained. Basically, you're a project engineer on a project that isn't running. There's not 40 hours worth of work for you to do. But we're going to have you do 8 hours of work because there's that. And then we're going to let you go 2 weeks negative on vacation so you can bring your earnings back up to a regular level. And if you run out of vacation, we're going to establish a vacation pool where people who have vacation can donate it. We had over $250,000 worth of vacation donated by employees that became available to those who needed it. There were a couple of other measures. The 401k company match was suspended, but it finally got to the point, and they never said it, they never promised that it wouldn't get to layoffs. They said, we're just doing everything we can to avoid them. So when they came, people knew that this leadership team had been doing everything they could to not have to do this. It was 25 people. They were treated with dignity and respect. And then the CEO went out on LinkedIn and wrote an article talking about how incredibly hard this was. He doesn't understand how there are CEOs who can be so cavalier about laying people off. These are people with families and lives. It's the middle of a pandemic. This was a heartbreaking thing to do. I lost sleep over it. He actually got an email from one of the employees who was terminated, thanking him for the LinkedIn column. It was great to know that this wasn't easy. So, you can't make a layoff a positive thing, but you can show that you struggled with this. You did everything you could to avoid it. And when it came, it was hard, but we were going to treat these people like human beings.
Yeah. Genuine, exactly. Genuine,
Right.
Genuine and empathetic. I think that's
exactly
the key thing.
Yeah.
And I think one other thing, we've talked about that, we keep talking about the basics, but I did hear from one company who announced that they were going to have a town hall meeting, and only when the town hall meeting started, they hadn't increased their capacity. And so half the people trying to join the town hall meeting couldn't get onto the town hall meeting, at which point their social channels blew up because people were saying, what's going on? And it's that feeling of, I'm not being told, it's not equitable, it's not fair, and it's fairness.
Right.
You have to make it, if you're going to have a meeting and you tell everybody, meeting in tomorrow for next stages of what's happening, you have to make sure everyone can be in that meeting. That's the worst thing that you can do. So it's do all of those things, but make sure people can access it. Don't forget those real simple things.
The basics. Look, guys, there's one last question I really want to get to, because I think this is this will be really helpful for anybody, even after the pandemic. And I do think that you guys are really well fit to answer this. This one's from Laura and reads, what is your one tip for setting up an internal communications function for an organization that has a predominantly disconnected workforce, or I'm assuming remote workforce? The challenge is to move the conversation away from functional daily communications to a wider focus on the business strategy. There probably is no one silver bullet, but what would be kind of a key way to engage a predominantly disconnected workforce around business strategy?
So it's going to take time. It's not something that you can just go, ta-da, here you go. Having done this before, when in an organization where we moved from a very operational model, and then we wanted to move into business partnering and business strategy and understanding the business and a more strategic communications function, it took a long time. There is no one bullet, but what you can do is figure out where are your quick wins and start to go after those quick wins. And they don't have to be super sexy, but what they have to be is if those quick wins can be with someone who's influential, great, fabulous, even better. But make sure that those quick wins are visible, because I think one of the experiences I had was trying to explain what it was that we wanted to do from a partnering perspective. People still didn't understand. And it was only when we were able to put together a campaign. Somebody worked with me. She got what I was talking about. We worked together on something for several months. We put out the sort of the output of the campaign, and everyone went, "Oh, that's what you're talking about. That's what you mean. That's what you can do. Oh, okay. Well, how long does that take? Because we want that, because that's cool." And you then explain that takes longer than, a 24-hour turnaround. That might take 3 months. And that's when we started to see some shifts. But I think it's that the other thing is like business acumen. Be curious, ask questions, understand the business, and make sure you as an internal communicator are not just coming with the communications point of view, but you're coming with a business perspective that you can then translate into a really cool thing for communications. If you can prove that gets the business on side, and then it's a slow build. But it's not a magic bullet. It's a slow build, but it does happen in the end.
I would say that the trick to getting people engaged with the strategy, first of all, is make it relevant to them. Strategy is very high level for a lot of employees. It's something the executives deal with. It doesn't have anything to do with what I do here day to day on the job, and you have to help connect those dots and help them figure out what this means to them. The second thing is to involve them. Don't make it just something that the executive team deals with. We have a 20-year strategic plan. It has been broken into 4 5-year milestone chunks. Right now we have 4 milestone teams, each working on an element of the first 5-year effort, and every one of them has volunteer employee teams that have taken on chunks of this. They have gone out to the workforce and said, we're looking for volunteers to help figure out how to do X. Employees are raising their hands, and as other employees see these employees, first of all, recognized, second of all, learning new skills. One of them took a facilitation course, a 1-day course, and got a certificate.
Awesome.
So suddenly they know meeting facilitation. And third, that they're actually having an impact on the direction of the organization. Then the next time there's a call for volunteers, there's twice as many. Employees want to be involved if given the opportunity, and if it's sincere and authentic. There's no reason that they can't be just as effective at driving a strategy as people in the C-suite.
I think the thing about having a disconnected workforce that makes it challenging is that you are so reliant on so many other people in order to help with that communication. So for me, it kind of comes back to the first point of the importance of line managers. I've set up a couple of comms functions with disconnected workforces, and it's exactly as Janet said. It's you find the quick wins, you make sure that to some degree they are around people of influence, but it's also making sure that you understand your disconnected audience. So I mentioned earlier that I'd done some research into the deskless workers and how to communicate with them. That research is free. It's available to anybody on remotelyinterested.work. You can download it, have a look at it. But it was talking to bus drivers, factory workers, to understand how to communicate with them and how to make sure that we were doing a great job as internal communicators. And one of the things that comes up is making sure that they have that autonomy. So as Shell said, involve them. So much of a role of a disconnected worker is not autonomous. So a bus driver has very little autonomy, and we know that's a core motivator. So you have to give them that choice around the channel. You have to give them the choice to access the information. So there's things you can do to make sure that as you're building your function and your structure, that you're enabling those things to happen around you that link into communication. But definitely that framework of a strategy that they can own. So when I worked for a hospitality company, we had a strategy that was, love food, expert innovators. It had loads of other things around it, but we kind of had a strap line around love food. And then it was down to the individual stores to come up with what they were going to do to demonstrate that. So that gives them that empowerment. So it's finding ways that makes it link to them, exactly as Shell and Janet have said before. There's some nice ways you can do that as long as your strategy is a framework and not a complete, kind of top-down piece. But very happy to chat more if it's helpful, Laura. I've done it a couple of times. So happy to.
There was a great internal communicator named Ed Robertson. He was the head of internal communications at FedEx. He reported directly to the CEO. That's how great a job he did. Was the CEO didn't want a layer between him and internal comms, and he came up with a sort of a communications Maslow's hierarchy that starts with logistics. You have to achieve logistical success before anybody's going to get to the top of the pyramid, which is, what do you want from me? I will change my behavior, which is what all internal communications is all about, is either reinforcing or altering behaviors, right? Once you get the logistics right, did it get to you on time? Was it in the right language? Things like that. It has to get the attention of the individual. And of course, what gets the attention of somebody who's out on a project, pouring concrete is different from what gets the attention of somebody who's in an executive suite. But then you get to relevance, which is two layers, right? First of all, does this have anything to do with me? And second, if it does have something to do with me, will paying attention to this actually be beneficial in some way? Is it going to help me advance through the organization, make me more productive, whatever it may be? And only once you get past that do you get to the point where somebody says, okay, what do you want from me? So I really like those two stages of relevance. If your communications don't help people figure out what does this have to do with me and why should I pay attention to it, you'll lose them before they get to the point where you're going to get what you want from them, get the outcome you're looking for.
Yeah.
It's
relevant.
We used to have a slightly blunter way of saying that, Shell. We used to be like, why do I care?
Right. What's in it for me?
And so, exactly. And so you would have a partner that would come and talk to you, and they say, we need to do this, and we need to. And like, okay, so I'm the employee. Why do I care?
Yeah.
And if they couldn't answer that question, then why are we talking about it?
That's the end of the meeting, isn't it?
Is it? Yeah, exactly. It's like, is it that actually this is something that you need to do as a partner that they want to tick off their list? Does the employee give a hoot? How is it going to make their life radically better? If they don't care, end of conversation, sort of, until somebody can go away and explain why they can care, which is a slightly blunter and less kind way of saying what Shell said.
Make it all relevant. I think that's a great way to end it off, or else, people are going to tune out if your communications aren't relevant. Well, guys, we're already 3 minutes past the hour. I know, again, we could keep going. We could keep going on this. I saw some, Jenny, your research. We wouldn't have time to cover that all, to do it justice. So thanks, Olis, for putting that in the chat. I also saw there's a question for Shell, if you could potentially share that Maslow's hierarchy of communications, if you can pull that up. I'm sure people would be interested to see that if you post that on social media. But I wanted to wrap up, say thank you, everybody, for joining. Again, we host these types of sessions every month. I'm going to put a link right now for our next live session. Don't worry, if you click on it, you won't be sent away. You'll still hear us say our words of wisdom. But guys, thank you so much for joining this live session. Do you have any kind of last words of wisdom to hand everybody that are kind of trying to navigate engaging a remote workforce right now?
God, final words of wisdom, no pressure.
Empathy.
God, empathy, relevance, the basics.
The basics.
They're my three.
I think those are like the key points that were brought up in almost every single answer. So if you guys don't remember anything else from this session, remember the basics, remember empathy, and remember relevance.
And give them reasons to tune in and pay attention to your communication. If you're communicating just the way you were before all this started, I think you're missing the boat.
Exactly.
And then the last one from me,
yeah.
You probably didn't realize, but I have been feeding my dog treats all the way through this session.
I was going to say, your dog has been a good dog.
She's been really good. And I wasn't sort of ignoring people and looking away. It's that I had her here. And so I've just been breaking up treats and she's just nicely disappeared. And so, yeah, always be prepared. You never know when you might need treats and it will actually sail you through and you can be that swan gliding away on top, and actually your hands and your everything else is working away underneath to make sure that that everything looks calm and smooth and professional. So yeah, be prepared.
Pro tip right there. If you want to connect with any of our speakers, their information is on the screen right now. And of course, if you want to hear about how SMARP can help you as an employee communications platform communicate better with your employees, feel free to reach out to us as well. But that's all for now. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. Thank you, Jenny, Janet, and Shell for joining us. And yeah, see everybody at the next one.
Awesome. Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.